good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from, wherever you're watching this webinar today. My name is Dave Holdorf. I'm with TACO, and welcome to another edition of TACO Tuesday. So today's class going to be the finer points of Mon-Con boiler piping. We're going to talk about some hydraulic separators, buffer tanks, and making sure you size the circulator correctly. But before we get started, one, I want to make sure that everybody can see and hear and everything is working just fine. The technology is there. If you can, in the question section area, if you've been here before, you know what you want to do. You just want to give me a quick hi, hello, how are you? And also let me know where you're from. Because when I started off earlier before saying good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, I have no idea where everybody is from the country. Some of you, it's TACO Tuesday, it's lunchtime. Some of you, it's not. It's just you just getting your day started. And others, you might be ending your day. So we've got a couple jumping in right away. Stanley, thank you very much, coming out of Chicago, and Hader out of Memphis, and Brian, excellent, out of Toms River. Mr. Josh, good to see you, brother. All right, so to speak. All right, Carlos from Colorado. Morgan saying everything is sounding and looking good. I'm glad to hear it, that everything you guys can see and hear, because otherwise I'd be talking to myself. And that is right. Yes, I will be by myself today. John and Jason are out west in Seattle, so it's morning for them. And I know they were just getting started in some training classes out that way. Myself, I'm not in the studio back at home. I am in a hotel room right now in Montreal. I am here for the CHC conference, the Canadian Hydronics Council conference. I stole away for a little bit to do this webinar today. I've got a training class tomorrow. So if you're anywhere in the area, make sure you stop on by the booth and or come to my training class tomorrow. I'm doing the ABCs of ECM out there. So Ernie from Mississippi, excellent. Matt from Maine, awesome. Ken from Alberta. Yes, it is just me, brother. It is just me today. The other guys are apparently working today. I'm not sure. I'm not checking on them, but that's all right. So yes, you got me for the for TACO Tuesday today. And actually, I just want to jump out of topic for a second here. I want to know if anybody came or saw the TACO the TACO After Dark that we had done a couple of weeks ago, about a week and a half ago, where we did TACO After Dark live. We're also streaming at the same time, and we had Cheryl, the CEO of TACO, online with us as well, and it was a wonderful, wonderful evening that we had with Cheryl, and just talking about the future of TACO and her past and her storied life and to where she got to. So if you haven't seen it, make sure you take a look at it, because yes, we did it here on the GoToWebinar platform, but TACO After Dark is also being streamed on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn at the same time right now. So take a look at one of those if you haven't seen one yet. You can really see the behind the scenes and everything about TACO and where we're going as a company. It was a really great evening that we got to spend with Cheryl. So anyways, with that being said, shall we get this party started? So let's tee this up. Let's talk about boiler piping and boiler circulators. And yeah, I couldn't not bring in the Ryder Cup into today too. So it was being a Long Islander, it was a little bit of insanity on the island all around the Ryder Cup. It was an amazing couple of days of watching some golf, if you guys are into golf at all. But anyways, so let's talk about some of the Mod-Con basics and making sure that we pipe this thing correctly. That's the important part here. There are some rules and regulations, so to speak, that you want to follow. The most important thing that you want to pay attention to when you're doing any piping around your wall hung boilers is RTFM. Read the free manual, read the factory manual from the manufacturer. They're going to tell you everything on how that piece of equipment should be piped and how it's going to work out there. So when we start talking about primary, secondary piping, it's got a little bit of a twist to it, maybe changing a little bit of the terminology that we're used to talking about when we see primary, secondary piping. So when we used to do it in the past, primary, secondary, especially around our cast iron boilers, and when we were doing some low temp systems like radiant floor and a high temperature boiler, we would do that primary, secondary to make sure that we had a high enough return water temperature back to that boiler, so this way that boiler did not condense its flue gases. But now when we start looking at boilers that are hanging on the wall, they are designed to condense. We want them to condense. We want that cooler water temperatures. So primary, secondary, when we first started doing it from a residential standpoint, was there to protect the cast iron and keep those elevated temperatures up. But now when we're looking at mod cons, we actually want the temperature as cool as possible. And I'll show you a graph on that later on what we're really looking for. The other big reason for our primary secondary is we're not protecting it any longer, but what we also have is a high pressure drop through that heat exchanger. So therefore we are installing a circulator just for that purpose for the boiler itself. So therefore we're more or less injecting our heated water into the system loop itself. So I kind of think of primary, secondary today. I'd rather call it boiler loop and heating loop, not necessarily primary, secondary, because it does get confusing on where equipment is installed and things like that. So here, let's take a look at that mod con and calling it, let's say, a moose antler design, meaning you got your supply and return on either side. Okay, so here we see this boiler. If you were to take the terminology that we used to use for our cast iron boilers as the primary loop, we used to say that this was the primary loop because that was the boiler and this was the secondary. All right, so it is still servicing the heating loops throughout the structure itself, but this is where we're dropping our air elimination, our expansion tank, our fill valves is on this secondary loop. And in our old way of thinking with our mod con boilers, we used, on the cast iron boilers, we would put this on the boiler loop itself. So today's designs with our mod cons, we want to see on the secondary. So that's why I prefer to call it more of a boiler loop and heating loop rather than primary, secondary. So therefore we're injecting into the heating loop here. Okay. So we pump into the heat exchanger. So we're not, and that's also gets a little confusion there too while talking about pumping away. Pumping away was never about pumping away from the boiler. Pumping away was always about pumping away from the expansion tank. So the service of this circulator here is designed to create flow through that boiler itself. So so we're not necessarily pumping away or into the expansion tank. It's just that the expansion tank is there, if that makes any sense. But we wanted to make sure we pump into that heat exchanger. So we got to keep that pressure up. We don't want to see a low pressure like the suction side of the circulator because, these things pull out energy so fast from the flame and into the water itself that we got to make sure we have that high flow. We got to keep that flow of water going through the system itself. Otherwise, we could start creating issues in the heat exchanger. So we don't want that water to flash into steam at all and therefore impinge on the surfaces of the heat exchanger itself. So so that's what we're really trying to do and making sure that circulator is pumping into it. Now, there are some boilers out there, some manufacturers that have the circulator internal, but there's quite a few. I'd say about 70-75% of them have them external in there. So therefore, that's where we as the installers and designers get to make these systems as efficient as possible, because the biggest reason why this thing went on the wall in the first place is because that brochure, that nice glossy warm and fuzzy brochure on the front side of it, when you looked at it, it said, oh, this one's going to be 96% efficient. All right, let's make sure we make it 96% efficient. Okay, so there's certain parameters in order to get there. Just dropping it in and making it perform like that old cast iron boiler does not mean you're going to get 96%. So we want to make sure we get there. So having that external circulator here, so this way, one, we can size it, and two, we can set it up properly, is going to get us that efficiency that we're looking for. So if anybody has any questions whatsoever, I do have the question screen up over here, so make sure you type them in. I am periodically taking a look at it, so I don't do any question and answer periods. If you have a question about what you see on the slide or it was a slide ago, please never hesitate to interrupt me. I will make breaks in here, and I will answer any questions that we see coming up in here. All right. So let's take a look. Let me jump back a second. Let's take a look at the dynamic that is happening down here at those two T's that are tied into the secondary from the boiler loop here. I want to zoom in on that. All right. So I've got a couple of scenarios on what we can see when you start looking at two different circulators in a system that, yes, are hydraulically isolated from each other, meaning the whole idea behind these closely spaced tees is that the flow from the secondary does not and cannot affect the flow in the boiler loop, and vice versa. The boiler loop cannot and will not affect flow in the heating loop. So by having these closely spaced tees here ensures the proper operation of the circulator. So when you size your circulator for heating, it just has to worry about what it's doing BTU wise and the pressure drop of this pipe. And this circulator just has to take care of the pressure drop through here and the required flow through the boiler itself. So we take a look at a possible flow pattern, and this would be ideal that you would see with those two T's. So you see here on the left-hand side, this is the heated water coming out of the boiler. We want to take that straight water coming out of the boiler and send it right out to the heating system, meaning the flow and BTU output of the boiler exactly matches the demand on the system. So therefore, all of the demand is coming back and going back up into the boiler itself. That would be ideal. This would be the coolest water temperature that we could expect, but it's not a very practical way because then when you end up with two circulators in series in that respect, it just doesn't happen. We don't have perfectly sized boilers to perfectly sized heating systems, and everything is humming and hawing the entire year round, exact matches. All right, and unfortunately, it doesn't happen that way. So trying to get all the equipment to work together in unison is going to be difficult, but it works. All right, again, but it's not very practical to happen all the time. You might see this a very, 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 very small percentage of the heating season. So second flow pattern that we're going to see, and this is going to happen a lot more often, is that the flow through the heating system, all right, going out to the house itself is going to be higher than what the boiler is going to do. So you're going to see that heated water come out of the boiler itself. We're going to see cooler water coming back into the boiler, but we're also going to see blending occur. So some of that return water is going to blend back in with the supply water being fed out. So we need to pay attention to that because we need to make sure that when we're setting up our boiler, we're setting it up properly to satisfy the demand. Because you might have set this boiler up to, say, deliver 150-degree water, but out to the heating system, out to the zones that you have, but it might be tempered down here and may not get you that 150 that's out there. So what you're looking for may not actually occur. So it becomes down to setting up the boiler properly to get you that temperature. All right, so I see a couple questions came in from Ali. Does the same configuration apply to an air source heat pump with a storage tank? Pretty much so. Except that you won't see that primary, secondary piping, but you'll see the storage tank and buffer tank in a little bit, Ali. Thank you very much. That'll come up in a few slides from now. Where do you prefer putting the zone valves? I see you have them on the system supply side. So if you are doing zone valves like I showed on this diagram earlier and the circulator there, I do like my zone valves on the supply. And that is mostly so because our boiler's in the basement and everything getting heated is above us, and hot water can rise in the pipes themselves and fall in the exact same pipe. So by having a zone valve closed, you will not see any of that gravity flow that could occur to a system itself. It has nothing to do about performance of the circulators and zone valves. It's just to prevent any gravity flow in your system, because when you have a check valve, when you have a circulator, you don't want to put a check valve when you have zone valves in your system. So, excellent question, George. Thanks very much. Stanley, another question, is the small piece of piping between the outlet and inlet to the boiler necessary? Is the small piece of piping between the outlet and inlet to the boiler necessary? I'm not sure which piece you're talking about there. Are you talking about these two here? This T in between, this piece of pipe? Yes. And they have to be as close as possible. Yes. So your primary secondary is looking at two T's as close as possible. So I'm going to go back a couple of slides to help out Stanley here for a second. So give me a couple of clicks here. All right. So when you put those two T's together, this circulator runs and water flows through here and comes back down. water, let's say this circulator is off at the moment. When water hits that T, what's it want to do? It wants to take the path of least resistance, and the path of least resistance would be coming back up this way to get back to the suction side of the circulator. That's as if this is off, okay? Once the circulator's on, but all we know is that this pump has to satisfy the flow and head through that pipe itself, and this one over here. So, all right, excellent. You got it, Stanley. All right, so flow pattern number 2. This is going to happen often, so we need to make sure we can pay attention to that. And then there is flow pattern 3, like I was kind of just showing you a second ago. This is also going to happen, and we have to pay attention to that as well, because we want, again, like I said before, as cool of water as possible. And this situation occurs when the flow through the boiler exceeds the flow through the heating zones, or the demand out of the heating zones. So you may have 3, 4, 5 zones on a system itself, but if only one small zone is calling, then that's where we can get a lot of this backwards flow, where we end up sending warmer water back to the boiler. And therefore, circulator size here becomes pretty important, that we want to pay attention to. So pattern 2 and 3, we're going to see often. We don't get to see pattern 1 often, but the 2 and 3 we're going to see a lot of times. And knowing that this occurs allows us to program and set up the boiler properly, as well as setting up our circulator properly. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense to everybody out there once we start talking about what we've got going on and what we're doing in here with our closely spaced tees. All right. So that first scenario that we're going to run into, that I said that we're going to see that blending and cooler water coming out to our system. So we see here that we have a design, and our design is calling for 7 gallons a minute flow, and the water temperature is looking at 150 degrees. And we're designing it on a 20-degree delta, so therefore if 7 gallons a minute at 150 goes out, we want to see 7 gallons a minute at 130 coming back. When we look in the boiler manual, the boiler says, hey, we want to see at least, 4.5 gallons a minute through that heat exchanger. So, that we got to be cognizant of that. That's the minimum flow. All right, let's take a look. We'll be at that minimum flow coming back, going through the boiler heat exchanger itself. So what temperature do we need to make the boiler do? So that's our high limit, so to speak. If this is design day, so 7 gallons a minute, 150 degrees, that's my design day, but that may not be the actual temperature that you want the boiler to do. All right, it's going to have to be higher, because we're going to see that blending that happens in scenario 2 and 3. So Robert here is asking, how critical is the boiler circ placement supplier return? Here, we want to see this on the return. One, it's on the instruction manuals for most of the manufacturers. They want to see that circulator there, but it's also to maintain the pressure in the boiler itself, because when you put the circulator on this side over here, pumping down, what you'll end up having is the suction side of the circulator right after the heat exchanger. And we want to maintain that high flow. These heat exchangers transfer energy so fast that we do want to see this on the return side of the boiler itself. All right. So yeah, there's going to be a math formula. I mean, when do you come to a TACO Tuesday webinar and we don't have any formulas? So actually, I think in a couple of weeks, we'll have one that doesn't have any formulas in it. So anyways, I was just looking at, but yeah, we're going to do some math, and it's not going to be crazy math. It might seem daunting when you look at it. So the formula that we're going to see here is the balance equation here. So this is showing us the flow at A times the temperature at A. Add that to the flow at B times the temperature at B will equal the flow at C times the temperature at C. So there's your formula to do some of this math. And what we're trying to do is figure out where is A, B, and C. So that's the hardest part that you're looking at, right? So you have to determine where is each one of these. So flow and temperature at A is going to be the flow and the temperature between the two T's. All right, that's what we see there. All right, so the system flow was calling for 7 gallons a minute, but the boiler's calling for 4.5. So if I've got 7 gallons a minute coming back here at 130 degrees, and the boiler's calling for 4.5, so we're going to take 4.5 out. Therefore, 4.5 comes back, and there is something left in the middle. That's our 2.5 gallons a minute flowing in the direction from right to left. And because it's coming back at 130 degrees, that is also what we're going to see between those two T's. So we are going to see 2.5 gallons a minute at 130 degrees. Now, flow at B is my boiler. All right, my flow is going to be 4.5 gallons a minute. All right, but our temperature at B is what we need to find. All right, so that's going to be our X moving forward. And then my flow at C and temperature at C is going to be what my heating system is calling for. All right, so my 7 gallons a minute at 150 degrees going out to the system. So now what we're going to do is we're going to plug in the numbers that you know. How do you know the temp at that area between the T's? It has to be. It has to be. So we have 7 gallons. So we know our design is calling for 7 gallons a minute at 150 degrees going out. That's what we calculated from our heat loss project and our design and our heat emitters and whatever we have going out to the system itself. And so if it's going out at 7, it's got to come back at 7 on a design day. And we want it to operate on a 20-degree delta. Let's say we had some fan coils or some fin tube baseboard installed in this system that we want to see it operate on a 20-degree delta. So that means it's going to come back at 130 degrees. So if I've got 7 gallons a minute at 130 right before the T, if I take 4.5 gallons out, 2.5 remains, and it's still 130 degrees because it is flowing from direction right to left. All right, so that's how I know that temperature is going to be 130. All right, so if it's 130 here, it's going to be 130 right between the T's. I hope that helps you there. Josh? All right, so flow and temp. So let's solve for X. Sorry, okay. So 2.5, meaning my gallons per minute, times 130 degrees on the return in between those T's. Add that to 4.5X equals 7 times 150. And now we just start mathing things out. So 325 plus 4.5X equals 1050. All right, now we're going to subtract 325 from both sides. So we end up with 4.5X equals 725. And therefore X, which is my temperature at B, says I need that boiler to do 161 degrees. All right, so that's what I need to program my boiler up for, is 160 if your design is calling for 150 on a design day. All right, that's all zones calling. All right, so that's where we get involved with that modulating and the conning and the condensing part of that boiler. Mostly on the modulating here, that's what we want to look at. So just knowing that is going to help this boiler run a lot more efficient. Now, I run into so many people, they'll just jack it up to 180 because all of a sudden they get the phone call. They had set it for 150. The house isn't heating. They show up not knowing this formula and they just jack it up to a higher temperature. Now, yes, it makes everybody comfortable and everybody's not complaining that on the heat in the house any longer, but it's not as efficient as it can be. If we start raising those temperatures in the boiler, we're going to start seeing cooler water, not as cool, coming back. So right now we would be seeing 130 degrees coming back into this boiler and we'll start condensing. As it warms up outside, that temperature on that reset curve that is programmed into the boiler, maximum of 161, and then we'll start ramping down. So if the supply starts to ramp down as it gets warmer outside, the return starts to ramp down, and then this thing now, meaning the boiler, starts to see those high efficiencies that we're looking for. We want to see this thing get to that 95, 96, 97% efficient. All right. But again, this is ideal conditions for everybody running on a design day. Okay. So when we start looking at hydraulic separators and buffer tanks, all right, they're relatively the same thing. It's adding a little bit of mass into your system, but what it's also doing is eliminating those two T's that you have and making sure you place the T's properly. But what it also does is it starts to add more mass. It adds more BTU, it adds more volume of water to the system itself. And now what we end up doing, depending upon what you've got, is this boiler is now running off of the buffer tank slash hydraulic separator rather than just what the supply temperature is in the system on calls for heat. And our heating system then draws off of that. So the boiler satisfies the BTUs in the tank, and then therefore the circulator just draws off of that. Okay, you would still need to size it properly, meaning that temperature that we said before. So this would still need to do 160 degrees. We got rid of the T's, but we still see that same blending that happens inside of the buffer tank slash hydraulic separator that you see here. All right, so when we add our buffer tanks into our system, now we start getting a little bit bigger. So we start adding a little bit more mass to that ModCon boiler, okay? And therefore we start reducing the short cycling because these boilers transfer energy so fast, their run times can be really small, especially when not all the zones are calling in the house. So when we start seeing that on-off operation of the zones in the house, the boiler starts to get those on-off operations. And when we see that, that's when we start ruining the efficiency of the boiler, and we start ruining equipment lifespans. Things turning on and off, on and off, on and off all day long start to ruin the efficiencies of each other. So if we get to reduce that short cycling, we'll make this thing work a lot better, a lot more efficient. See those numbers, because when's a boiler most efficient? And I'll wait for this one. When is a boiler most efficient? So I know I asked questions on here, but I want to hear what you guys have to say. Justin, yes, he's got it. Most definitely. Chris, thank you. When it's off, yes. When it's off, it uses zero amount of fuel, okay? But then when is a boiler most efficient? When it's got a nice long run time. So when you've got some storage, you've got a buffer tank like this that's got some gallons behind it, we sip the BTUs out of that tank, and then when it needs to, the boiler replenishes the BTUs into that tank and gets a nice long run time. At that point, it doesn't care how many zones are running. So that's where the buffer tanks really start adding and getting to that efficiency of the system. Yes, you got to find the space for it, but two, that's really going to help out, especially when you start seeing a lot of zones. Because in today's houses, how many zones are normal today? All right, how many zones are normal? There is no such thing as normal. All right, how many zones was normal 50 years ago? One. All right, so now we start seeing all these changes in our mechanical rooms, especially with the boiler itself, making sure we pipe it properly, but also making sure that we can get that boiler to operate as efficient as possible. All right, why do we have to use a hydraulic separator instead of a two-way valve? Why do we have hydraulic separator instead of the two T's, you mean? Yeah. Well, you don't have to. So you can go to closely spaced T's. The next best would be jumping up to your hydraulic separator, because you got to make sure those T's are done right. Hydro separators, when they're smaller ones, allow you to be a little more forgiving in your piping. All right, because you've got those strict rules when it comes to your closely spaced T's. No more than 4 pipe diameters of the main is the distance between center to center of your 2 T's. And then from the next set of T's should be another 12 to 18 inches of straight uninterrupted pipe. So you got to make sure those rules are followed. And a lot of the boiler manufacturers already have a pre-piped header to get you those T's to follow within their rules. Hydro separators just eliminate all of that for you. Brett had a question. Would you still recommend a buffer tank with 8 flat panel radiators? Never hurts. Buffer tanks are never horrible, all right, to add into your system. Now, I guess the question is not necessarily 8 panel radiators. I'm also curious as to how it's zoned. All right, you could have 8 panel rads in the house, but 1 zone. So adding more mass, especially when we start looking at more zones, is where we start seeing the efficiency gains and those savings that we see out there. Okay. So excellent. Thanks for the questions, everybody. Greatly appreciated. So here you can see a schematic with a buffer tank in there. Again, you see it looks exactly like your hydro separator, all right, except now it's just had a larger zone on here. I mean, a larger mass. So same exact thing. You're still going to have your air separation over here. Maybe your mag dirt separator still got your circulator pumping into the boiler itself. And the job of this circulator is now to pump around this circle, and over here, now this one's showing heating pumps. The job of this circulator is just to go around the system, back, and through the buffer tank again as well. Same principle applies when we talked about programming the boiler for water temperature like we did before. So you're still going to set this up. If your design's calling for 150, yes, this boiler is still going to maintain 160 output on that design day. Question from Chris, is a hydraulic separator and a low loss header the same? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. We used to call them low loss headers all the time, and more people are coming into the names of hydraulic separator. So yeah, we love coming up with new names for stuff in our industry. If you're not sure what it does, just say the name in reverse, right? It's a header that has low head loss. Yes, a hydraulic separator and a buffer tank. Since there's no pipes in the middle here, it's just a couple of tappings, the pressure drop inside is very, very low. So again, hydraulically isolating one side from the other. Same as your closely spaced tees. Excellent. All right, so, but how do you size your buffer tank? All right, how do you size that buffer tank? Because there's a lot of different designs to them, and we all know our mechanical rooms are getting smaller and smaller. So I want to make sure that it's not too big, but I also want to make sure I didn't oversize it. Now, if you oversize it, not going to be that big of a deal. Undersizing, not horrible, but it all depends on what your goal was when you designing in that buffer tank. So let's take a look at some of that math that we have involved in sizing a buffer tank. So because there's another formula for that too, right? So hang on a second. Let me just grab some water here since I am running solo here today. Thank you very much. All right. So what we want to do is take a look at the minimum boiler firing rate. All right. So it's your boiler that goes on the wall. They're going to have a turn down ratio. So it could be anywhere from a 3-to-1 turn down ratio to some of the ones I'm seeing today, it's a 20-to-1 turn down ratio. So you need to know what your minimum firing rate is, and you need to know what is the BTU loss or the heat loss of your smallest zone. So you take that minimum firing rate and the smallest zone in your system, that becomes a BTU surplus, because the boiler is not going to fire small enough for that smallest zone that you have in the system itself. So that becomes your surplus. What we do with that number is that we multiply it by the desired minimum runtime. All right, and this is an arbitrary number that we typically pick. And most people out there, most designers are going to choose 10 minutes. Because it's just a number that we're arbitrarily grabbing out there to give to come up with a cycle factor. So we take that BTU surplus and we say, all right, we want the boiler to run for a minimum of 10 minutes. It doesn't mean that's going to be the minimum off time that the boiler is going to be sitting there. It's probably going to be off for a much, much longer period of time because we're sipping the BTUs out of that tank, okay? So then we take the cycle factor and we divide it by our delta T times 500, which then gives us our tank capacity in gallons. That's the formula. That's it. That's all you need to worry about. All right. So you can change that 10 minutes to 15 if you wanted to. And you can change your delta T's, but let's do a quick example. All right. So let's say you had a 150,000 BTU boiler. All right, and it had a 10-to-1 turn down ratio, and I chose 10-to-1 because it made the math easy in my head. That's it. All right, so yes, there are boilers out there that will do a 10-to-1 turn down ratio very easily. Okay, so we take my smallest zone, which is about 5,000 BTUs. All right, and we subtract it from my BTU of my smallest turn down ratio. So 15,000 minus 5,000 gives me a 10,000 BTU surplus. That's it. So we have an extra. When you stop and think about that for a second, the boiler is firing 15,000. It's on its lowest possible firing. And the smallest zone in our house is 5,000 BTUs. So there's 10,000 BTUs that if you did not have a buffer tank, 10,000 BTUs is going back to the return side of the boiler itself. Okay. So now we see that undesirable where we had some heated water coming out of the boiler on the supply side, all right, but then it was going right back. We're sending back 2/3 of that water right back to the return side of the boiler. So therefore, we're not seeing a cool temperature coming back either, okay? So here we have that 10,000 BTU surplus. So to finish up the formula, so now we take that 10,000 BTUs, multiply it by a 10-minute runtime. Again, like I said, that was an arbitrary number that we chose, and that gets us a 100,000 cycle factor. So we take that 100,000 cycle factor, and now what we're going to do is divide that by 5,000, which was my delta T of 10. All right, so we have a 10-degree drop in the storage tank. That's what we're looking for. All right, because we don't want to see too much of a drop in temperature in the tank. Therefore, we're not getting that water temperature that our heating system needs. So we chose a 10-degree delta T on the tank itself. Divide that by 500. That's our units correction factor. When we've used that before, that's your how many minutes are in an hour, and the weight of 1 gallon of water, 8.33, and it's straight 100% water here. So the math comes in at a 20-gallon tank. That's it. That's all you need. All right, for a system like this, where your smallest zone was 5,000 BTUs, and you had a BTU surplus of 10,000, you're looking at adding a 20-gallon tank. Now, you might go down to the manufacturer. You might find a couple of manufacturers out there with buffer tanks out there, and they have a 15-gallon tank and they have a 30-gallon tank, but nobody makes a 20-gallon tank. So if you chose the 15, because I know the one manufacturer, I've seen one before, the Boiler Buddy, it's a 15-gallon tank, and it's literally about this diameter. All right, it's about a foot and a half diameter, but it's really tall. So this way you can get it to fit in there. It's a 15-gallon. Well, that's nice and desirable. It's a nice small footprint that it has, easy to pipe into the boiler. That just means you won't have a 10-minute runtime. You're going to see more like a 7-8 minute runtime, and that's okay. All right, again, we chose 10 minutes as an arbitrary number. Now, if you chose the 30-gallon tank instead of the 20, well, that means you're going to get like a 15-minute runtime, and that's okay too. All right, so me personally, if it was my house, I would go after the 30 if I had the choice in the space. Now, knowing my mechanical room and what I have to work with, my boiler room is a closet. I've already got my indirect in there. I got the boiler on the wall. If I were to add any buffer tank in there, it would probably be the 15. Just to add some of that efficiency to my house. So again, this is not law on that you must have a 20 in here. It's just a suggestion to get you that minimum 10-minute run cycle. Does that make sense out there, everybody? I hope it does. This is showing a larger system here, showing 2 boilers that are tied into a buffer tank. And that's also the beauty of it, right? So now you have these 2 loops tied together and tying into the buffer tank. And now from here, whether you did zone pumps or zone circulators, that's your choice. All right, but it is a great way to pipe in your systems and have that hydraulic isolation from one side to the next. Even if you were to cascade those 2 boilers, only one's firing, we're not pumping water through the second boiler that's off, because that's important too that you see here in following this piping diagram. So that was a lot of stuff out there, huh? On your buffer tanks, and we're not even done yet. All right, it's only 12:40. You know us, we're going to take it right to the last minute if possible. I might even end a couple of minutes early. You never know. So I'm not seeing any questions coming in here, so that sounds good. Excellent. Chris is yep. Okay, I hit that one already. Brett got back to me. Yes, 1 zone pump on a pressure differential. All right, so do you have TRVs on those radiators, Brett? That's what I'm curious about too. Let's see, what was the first question that you had? There was still recommend a buffer tank with 8 flat panel rads. Yeah, it might be a small one. It still could be a small one. Maybe a hydro separator would be enough out there. So if it's 1 zone, I might do the hydro separator, maybe not necessarily a buffer tank, because you got thermostatic radiator valves that are opening and closing, and you've got a variable speed circulator and things like that. So yeah, I would probably go with a hydro sep over a buffer tank in that application, since you're looking at 1 zone. Once I start seeing projects with more than 3-4 zones in it, that's when I start thinking about buffer tanks. So this way I can minimize that short cycling of the boiler. So, and again, that's just a recommendation, is not a requirement to think in sizing it. There's a lot of variables that come into play. But again, you can't do anything wrong with it too, right? So now let's talk about the boiler circulator size. All right, that circulator that we are talking about for the boiler. All right, especially if it's external, and even some of the internal ones, you may have some settings available that you can change to make this piece of equipment operate a heck of a lot more efficient. Again, the cooler the water, the better it is to size this circulator. So we want to make sure that we size that circulator and set it up, especially if we're looking at our variable speed ECM circulators there. So how do we choose it? All right, well, here's a piece of information that I have from Alpine, from Burnham. So they typically will ship a circulator to be used with it. And it's going to be a 3-speed and or a 3-setting circulator. But there are assumptions they are making. So they sized this near boiler piping equivalent of 50 feet of pipe and listed temperature differentials. So you'll see the charts on what it is, but they're assuming you have about 50 feet of pipe. That also counts all your elbows and all the pressure drop in that associated piping right around here, okay? If you keep it nice and tight and close like this, you already know that that circulator is going to be oversized because they're estimating it for worst case scenario. So, and here's also very important to read, all right? It is the installer's responsibility to ensure a proper installation and, where applicable, proper circulator speed setting for the boiler circulator to achieve a required flow rate. Where near boiler piping exceeds 50 equivalent feet, alternate circulator selection may be required, which means you got to do the math. All right, you got to take a look at the charts, you got to do the math, and you got to make sure that you size that circulator accordingly. So right now, the circulator that comes with the boiler is assuming 50 feet of pipe maximum, all right, that you have in the system itself. So here we can see the RTFM, right? Read the factory manual. And right here, we're taking a look at, say, that Alpine 80, all right? And that Alpine 80 at a 35-degree delta T. All right, yes, we sized the buffer tank before on that 10-degree delta T. We sized our heating system at a 20-degree delta T. We can size the boiler loop operating at a 35-degree delta T. And what they're showing you here with the 80,000 BTU boiler, to maintain a 35-degree delta T, the flow rate only needs to be 4.2 gallons a minute. All right, and that's kind of close to what we were talking about before, right? I had that 4.5 for my example that we had earlier, and therefore the head loss through the boiler is only 4.8 foot ahead. Now you see here they also do 30-degree delta, 25-degree delta, and a 20-degree delta. And of course, as you follow suit, as we go down, the flow rate goes up and the head loss goes up. Okay, and if we start looking at all the other models, they'll give you the same thing there. So when you start looking at those delta T's for the boiler itself, may depend upon a couple of factors. Maybe you don't want it to operate on a 35. If you didn't do a buffer tank, all right, do you want to see a 35-degree delta coming back from your heating zones, or making sure that we don't get that backwards flow? All right, so you may not achieve that at all because you have lots of little zones in your system. So you might need to see more of a 20-degree delta on your system rather than going to 35, or you've got a large indirect demand. So there's a lot of different ranges that this boiler can operate in, especially with that delta T that you have. So if we take a look in sizing a circulator and or the speed of it, all right, the first off at 4.3 gallons a minute, and yes, it was 4.8 foot ahead, but we have a little bit of pressure drop of some associated piping in between. That's my design. So that 80,000 BTU boiler, for the boiler loop, if you were to use a standard fixed speed, a fixed, not an ECM circulator, 0015 3-speed circulator, you're putting it on low all day long. Low all day long, all right? So it's going to pump right there. So you're going to get more like 4.5, 4.6 gallons a minute at close to 6 foot ahead, all right? Beautiful. And you're going to see a nice 35-degree delta across the boiler. Now, if you put it on medium, because hey, low is low, man, nobody does low, right? Low is for people that don't know what they're doing. Let's put it on medium because I'm not sure, All right, but I don't think I need to go high, and I don't want to go low. So you put it on medium. Now all of a sudden you're starting to look at over 6 gallons a minute flow rate, and yeah, it's delivering about 11 foot ahead, but that 6 GPM now shortens or makes that delta T smaller across the boiler. So once that delta T starts getting smaller, now all of a sudden we're not maybe condensing as much. Okay. And then especially high, because a lot of them come out of the box set for high, so we're going to leave it on high. All right, that heat exchanger has such a high pressure drop going through that I want to make sure I'm screaming that water through there. And now all of a sudden we're pumping out to the system about 7 gallons a minute. And if I go back a slide, I'm going to bring up that chart again, 7 gallons a minute. All right, now you're going to see a 20-degree delta. Now you're looking at a 20-degree rather than a 35-degree. All right, going across the boiler heat exchanger. So if it was going out at 161 and a 20-degree delta, all right, we're coming back at 141. And at that point, that boiler's not condensing. But if I go out at 161 degrees with a 35-degree delta, now we're condensing. All right, that's the idea behind making sure that we size that circulator properly. Okay. So here we can see, all right, oh yeah, I forgot I had this next. I didn't have to go backwards, right? So what speed are you going to set the circulator for, right? We already talked about that with your fixed speed, but what if we start looking at, again, where that condensing is? Here's what we want to see, all right? Here's what we want to see. So this steady state boiler operation, right? So we want to see that 135. Once we start seeing that 135 boiler temperature, we start condensing, all right? But now we start seeing it a lot more to the left here. So the lower the temperature, the quickly the efficiency goes up in our boiler. So up here is when we start seeing that 96, 97% efficiencies out of the boiler itself. All right, now all of a sudden down here and over here, we're looking at being in the high 80s. All right, not in and maybe low 90s at that point. So the lower, like I said, the better it's going to be. So grab that magic number and get it as low as you can on the return side to get these things to do what they're supposed to do. We get lots of phone calls at Takeo from customers that have brand new installed systems out there. It's heating the house just fine. And the reason why they're calling is because they ripped out that old 70s cast iron boiler that served them well for many, many years, put in this nice new fancy wall hung boiler that's got buttons and lights. You know, it's stainless steel, it's white, it looks really cool, but their fuel bill did not drop 20 points like they expected. All right, they went from a 70% efficient boiler to this 96% of equipment sitting up on the wall, and they're not seeing the numbers go as low as they wanted to. It's because we're not getting it as cold as possible on the return side. Now, yes, I'm talking design conditions, and there's no reason why we can't get a ModCon boiler to condense at design conditions. So that's the idea behind that. Question came in from Cindy here. Why isn't there a check valve shown in the boiler primary loop between the pump outlet and the boiler? I probably had circulators with check valves, if my example on the picture itself here in the system. Or you're talking about the pump outlet and the boiler. Yeah, because I'm going to have that circulator is going to be running when the boiler is running. So it's an internal check valve. I don't have an external shown here. So when you see the pictures of my circulators, they have a little arrow on it. One is for flow, but it's also going to be a check valve in there. All right, here's a couple other things to take a look at. You know, yes, you can size those circulators, you could do the math, and here's some of the minimum recommendations when they start looking at it, right? So here's one chart, another one from Burnham, and again with that same Alpine. And again, I'm not using or endorsing or saying this is what you got to do for boilers out there. They just had some really good information to share with you out there. Some of them have them based into charts, and you'll see these curves and whatnot. Again, take a look at the manual. It's going to tell you a world of information on what we can do. So when you look at the Alpine 80 here, and let's just say they're choosing that 25-degree delta T, all right, there's looking at a 7.3 gallons a minute, 14 foot of head loss. We can go with the 0015 set on 3. All right, so they want to see it set on high. All right, now all of a sudden you get to the Alpine 105, obviously bigger boiler, 25-degree delta. Flow goes up a little bit. Head actually goes down a little bit. We're still going to be on the speed 3. All right, so, and you can start looking at when we start jumping up into the larger sizes, the 150, the 210, all right, the 150 was still looking at that speed 3. Now, if you were trying to get a 20-degree delta, all right, you're not going to get that 20-degree delta coming out of here with a 0015. You're going to have to jump up the size of the circulator itself. All right, and obviously when you start jumping up the size of the circulator, then we end up costing putting a few more dollars into it as well. So remember, these boilers are coming with those. Things change, parameters change. If you wanted a 20, then you might be jumping up to the 0013. But you want to get that 35-degree delta. Now all of a sudden we're putting circulators on low speed rather than on high. All right. So I hope that makes some sense out there for everybody out there on what we're talking about when it comes to sizing those circulators. Just don't use what came in the box. And or even the ones that might be internal, you might be able to remove that circulator and put a different one in there to change the speed, to slow it down if it didn't have a speed selector switch on there. All right, so we take a look at the 1558. All right, you fall just outside of it. So when you see that flowing head that it recommended and it's outside the curve like these, and they say, well, wait a minute, how's that still working? Again, it was estimating that 50 feet of pipe. If it's a lot less, or even using the headers that the boiler manufacturers make, all right, that pressure drop becomes way lower. All right, so they're assuming that 50 feet of copper pipe coming out of it. And if you're not there, then you're still going to be safe, if you know what I mean. Oh, excuse me, back is out. All right, and again, same thing if we were to take a look at ECM. Some people have talked about not using ECM circulators for a boiler loop, and there's no reason why not. All right, there's no reason why not. Now, there are some manufacturers, and there's also no reason why you can't necessarily drop in a Delta T circulator either. So we want to try to maintain that delta. All right, so using something like the VT2218 or a few other circulators that are going to be coming out early next year that will have Delta T built in. Look for another Takeo Tuesday on that. Where we can use a Delta T across that heat exchanger. But double check with the manufacturer, because some of the logic that they have built into the boilers, they respond so fast that the circulator might take too long to respond. And what you end up with is you've got two drivers in one car. So just double check with them. I've got one in my house. It's been working for years. My ex counterpart, Mr. Rick Mayo, he put a Delta T in his boiler for many years, operated just fine and was as efficient as possible. So ECM for this, easily done all day, all night long. All right, everybody, and look at that. I did end a couple of minutes early. All right, so we have finished our class. If you have any questions at all, please do not hesitate to type them in here. I'll stay online as long as you want me to today. As long as it doesn't keep me until tomorrow afternoon when I have to do my training class. So anyways, I don't think anybody will stay online with me for 24 hours. There might be a few of you that might, all right, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm hanging out here in the hotel room by myself at the moment, so I would welcome the company. Now, next session, next week's class, I'm talking so this way, allowing you to type any questions that you do have, is going to be on October 14th. So a couple weeks off coming from us. All right. And we are going to do deep dives into the 3-speed and 3-setting circulators. So we're going to take apart the 0015 standard 3-speed circulators, the AC design. We're going to start looking at our 0015 E3. We'll start to look at the 0013. We'll also see the 0026 and all the way up to our 0034 E plus. You know, when do you use each one, where and why, and also the different settings that we have on the ECM side of things. All right. So that's going to be October 14th. So yes, a couple of weeks off for us. I think when we were putting the calendar together, we noticed that barely anybody was around to do some of these training classes. So it was just a lot of stuff going on. So that's our next class. If you haven't registered, go to the website, takocomfort.com/training, and you'll find the tab for us out there. Let's see here. Question from Stanley. Great presentation. Any chance of sharing the presentation slides? Stanley, we don't typically share the slides, but in 23 hours time, you will get an email with a link to the recording of this presentation. So you get to watch it over and over and over again. So excellent. Thank you for that. Dylan asked the same question. So yes, again, 23 hours time. We don't share our presentations out there. Excellent. Josh, how do you sign up for emails for these? Actually, yes, it is. So if you go to the website and log in, all right, and create a username and log in. Josh, yours might be a little bit different. You need to talk to Mr. Ken that can help you out with that to make sure that you get those emails properly. Stan, awesome. Thank you, everybody. Greatly appreciate you for coming and hanging out with me today. For everybody that came by to learn about boilers, make these things more efficient. Little subtle details, you can make them so much better. All right. When you start thinking about that hydraulic separator, what temperature to set the boiler for, and of course, adding buffer tanks into your system. Mr. Mark, good to see you, brother. All right. Hader, thank you very much, everybody. Greatly appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you all at the next Takeo Tuesday or Takeo After Dark, October 8th, actually. October 8th is going to be our next Takeo After Dark live, Wednesday night, 7 p.m. It's going to be on all the social media platforms, so make sure you follow Takeo, not my account, not John's account. Follow the Takeo account on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, all right? And we're going to stream live there. So I think the next time we're going to do, we have the guys from Mechanical Hub. So Mechanical Hub, if you're not sure who they are, they have an online hydronics magazine, so to speak. Great couple of guys out there, but we're turning the tables because they're normally the ones that are interviewing everybody else, and we're going to be interviewing them and seeing where they're going and where they see the hydronics industry going. So really looking forward to that. So October 8th, you'll also see that as a GoToWebinar platform, but you can also do it on the socials as well. Excellent, William. Good to see you. Hamid, thank you very much. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you the next time. And if you're in Montreal, I expect you to stop by the booth and see me. All right, or come to my training class. Thanks everybody. Catch you later. Have a great one.